Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our conversation and our journey and exploration through the Criterion Collection releases of this year, 2021. And on that note, I would like to focus our attention, if I may, on that title, which has been designated at spine number 1062. This is the extraordinary work from filmmaker Martin Scorsese from 2019. The name of the film is Rolling Thunder Revue, Bob Dylan's Story by Martin Scorsese. From 2019, Netflix and Martin Scorsese, what we have is yet another extraordinary achievement from this master filmmaker. This work is Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. And as the title suggests, and of course as this work shows, this is focusing in on the one, the only, the legend, the icon, that is Bob Dylan. And in particular, or to be specific, it is of course focusing in on this period of his life, his career, and the tour and the performances that made up this period known as the Rolling Thunder Revue. And of course, therefore, we see through the lens of this footage, as well as various interviews that are taken in the present day of various people, including Bob Dylan and others, looking back on this period of time in the 1970s. And so we have this mixture, well edited, very skillfully and deftly edited, of the past and the present, as it were. And of course, as I say, the past is focusing in on this period, which is this tour, and with a wonderful and delightful cast of characters and performers and musicians and artists. And at the center of this, of course, is the one, the only Bob Dylan. That is the Rolling Thunder Revue. It is a title, it's titled A Bob Dylan Story by Martin Scorsese, and I think that is very significant. Of course, it is a film that can be seen through a certain perspective and through certain descriptions as being, on the one hand, a type of musical documentary. And I think that is a very fair assessment to make, because after all, we are dealing with footage that could be described as being maybe archival footage, or footage that was taken at the time. And then now, in the moment, in the present day, we have certain performers and certain participants looking back on this particular point in time through the interview process. And so this is a structure or a conceit or a construct that is very much like the type of musical documentary or a historical documentary that we might be used to as viewers today. In other words, we watch a documentary in order to gain insight into the particular facts of a given point in time, the subject matter of, say, any documentary. Here it would be the Rolling Thunder Revue period of Bob Dylan, again, 1975-1976. So we have, therefore, the archive footage, or the footage taken at the time, and then now the present day interviews and how this mixes together. So in that way, it could be seen as a musical documentary. However, it is also described as a Bob Dylan story. And actually, I think this is incredibly significant, because the more one considers this work and the more one digs into the layers of this particular work, I think the more one does that, the more possibilities arise as to realizing that perhaps we are dealing not necessarily with a so-called quote-unquote journalistic documentary per se, but what we are talking about is something to do with the capturing of essences, impressions of time, the way that we try to describe, or artists or musicians or participants try to describe some kind of moment in time that once was but no longer is. And I think this can be described as being some kind of ephemeral moment, the poetry of the ephemeral moment, as it were. And I think this can be made even more concrete or contextualized when we realize that we are dealing, of course, with performances, live performances during, as I say, this extraordinary period, the Rolling Thunder Revue. We have a collection of dynamic, legendary performances. And they are recorded, and they are shot, and they are given eternal life, as it were, through the recording and through the image and through the documentary. But ultimately, especially from the viewpoint of the artist, and I think Bob Dylan himself testifies to this point, ultimately, these are performances that once were, but again, no longer are. They existed in one moment in time, and then from that moment on, they no longer exist. They linger, of course, in the mind and the memory and in the hearts of many fans and admirers and artists. But ultimately, this can be said to be some kind of linkage or some kind of attempt or endeavor at trying in some way to speak in perhaps poetic terms on the nature of memory and the ephemeral beauty of these types of performances that, as I say, exist only within the moment, and then they are gone forever. So what does that mean in terms of the perspectives that are being shared here? What this means is, I think, this film, Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, I think it sheds so much light on, as I say, the nature of memory, the nature of looking back on a historical period. And this leads, I think, very nicely into the way that this film weaves in the historical context of 1975, 1976, and how it tries to deal with, or perhaps maybe sidestep, or maybe, to put it another way, to try to create an impressionistic sense of what the historical backdrop is. And what I mean is, it doesn't necessarily seek to pinpoint with a type of journalistic endeavor what exactly happened on this date and this time in this period to create a chronology of history as depicted through documentary. No, no, no. On the contrary, it is creating the impression of history with this type of knowledge of what was going on, in particular 1976, and how this is very key in the context of American history, of United States history. But the film, I think, very interestingly, weaves this narrative in a way that creates the impression of history. And I think that creation of the impression of history is also at the heart of what I was referring to earlier about how we look back, or how artists or performers or participants look back on a moment in time. We are dealing with feelings and fragments and impressions, and these types of opinions and these types of perspectives that, of course, are always from a type of subjective point of view. And I think that subjective point of view is also linked with various types of emotions and feelings and energies, which is, I think, emboldened or perhaps best represented by, for lack of a better phrase, the human endeavor or the human experience. And I think that is what is going on here when we're talking about the so-called documentary. It's a documentary of impression. It's a documentary of the impressionistic spirit. Or to put it another way, it is a way in which I think Scorsese and company are trying to speak to the nature of the ephemeral beauty and memory, and perhaps thinking back on some things that perhaps aren't necessarily how they might have occurred in real time, but it's how we view them and approach them and engage with them in terms of moments in the past that I think is at the heart of what Scorsese is trying to do here. And linked with that notion is the idea of artifice. This is one of the key concepts of this film, the way in which this film presents artifice. Another way to express that is the way that this film presents truth and fiction. Or another way to put that would be truth and lies. Or another way to put that might be truth and illusion. Again, it's your choice how you want to view it. And I don't think any of these word choices is in any way negative or in any way type of demeaning towards the film. I think on the contrary, it actually speaks to the heightened power and the deep complexity of this work. In other words, we are given this type of documentary or story, as the title suggests. This is very important because the word story is a very deep word, because it could also be interpreted to mean a type of tale, something that is made up. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that this entire thing is made up fiction, right? We do have the testimony of history as given by the actual footage that we see incorporated into this film. We have that. We have some of the actual participants also speaking to various points in the form of the interviews that we have in the present day. We have that as well. But we're also given the conceit very early on about the nature of illusion in cinema, and how sometimes cinema shows us these tricks of artifice, these tricks of illusion, these tricks of fiction. And when we understand that conceit, as I say, set up very early on so spectacularly and so magnificently by Scorsese at the very onset, we realize that what we are dealing with here is a bold work of cinema that is weaving in things that might be true and also things that might not be true. The notion of fiction weaving in within the layers of nonfiction. What is truth? What is fiction? That becomes a type of game that is being played here so remarkably. In other words, sometimes what we might see here is indeed something that could be reflective of reality. But other times, other moments of this film present moments that we realize might not necessarily be what they are purporting to be. In other words, they are fiction. They are not real. They are not true. But, and this is an incredible type of statement of cinema, but that does not make this any less legitimate in terms of a work of art. It doesn't make it any less legitimate, a type of exploration of Bob Dylan during this period, right? And I think this is at the heart of this type of exploration, dependent on the balance between truth and fiction, or reality and artifice. In other words, it's really going at the heart of what drama is all about, I would suggest. After all, when we think of the notion of drama, and when we think of the notion of fiction, right, narrative fiction, novels, cinema, narrative stories, things that are made up, they could have their linkages to truth. They might be inspired by true stories. They might be inspired by real-life moments, real-life emotions. Of course, that is, of course, the case. But ultimately, they are just stories. They are works of fiction. Theater, literature, cinema, you name it, right? These can be works of fiction. They are, right, artifice. But what do they do? What do great works of fiction do, or what are they capable of? When you think in your lives of the types of great works of fiction that you have encountered, what does that do to you? These works that, as I say, are, in a certain point of view, not real. They inspire you, or they give you a sense of perspective, or they allow you to engage with the work to ultimately maybe see the world in a new way, maybe illuminate in terms of how certain real passions and real emotions operate in everyday human life. Maybe they help us to see the world as we should see it or as we might otherwise not be able to see it in our day-to-day goings-on, etc. In other words, fiction can allow us insights into truth and reality, if you know what I mean. And so in that way, I think a work like Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, is so consistent with that type of perspective on art. Namely, the idea that even though we might have a work that is dealing with truth and artifice, reality and fiction, the layering of these things, illusions, etc., within the reality, even though we have a work that is embedded within it, this idea of the illusion, of the ephemeral, something that is not real, still, that type of art can always lead to inspirations and epiphanies and realizations about our realities and our own situations and our own lives and our emotions, which are ultimately true and real to us as human beings in terms of our own human and emotional experiences. Thus, this is, I think, in terms of that type of exploration, astounding. And it is showing us, again, going back to my earlier comments about memory and how this seems to be operating on the idea of the ephemeral nature of memory. When we think about how we engage with our past, right? We engage with it through memory. Memory is not always 100% accurate. It could be faulty. Sometimes we might forget a little detail here and there, but it is always our impressions of it, what we make of it, how we engage with it, and ultimately how we walk away from that and what we learn from that. And I think that type of engagement is also at the heart of what I'm trying to say here about truth and fiction, about reality and illusion as layered so effectively and so skillfully within this extraordinary work called Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. In other words, the attempt at presenting illusion is the way by which this work seeks to illuminate about something of the truth of the human condition. And if I may add a type of footnote to that, I therefore believe that makes this work, Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, so much a great companion piece to another film by Martin Scorsese, which is called The Irishman. And the reason why I say this is because I can also see, or I can also recognize or interpret certain aspects of The Irishman. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about that film, but just to be as general as possible, I think one way to look at The Irishman is also as a film looking at characters that are looking at the past and looking at the long span of history from their younger days to where they are now. So past times and then the present, past and the present. Memory is involved. Perhaps the illusion of memory is involved. And also the idea of what is truth, what really happened, what were the actual events that occurred that are at the subject or at the heart of The Irishman. And what we see depicted in The Irishman, is this really what happened, or could it be just an impression of what happened? So I think that idea of what is really truth and what is really fiction, and even if what we are dealing with in that film is fiction, what does that say as a jumping off point into our own views of this film vis-a-vis the human condition and the human experience? In other words, how does fiction show us these next steps of engagement? And I think that also has to do with how The Irishman itself deals with the computer-generated effects makeup, what's known as the de-aging. And I would make the argument that even in that film, the de-aging effect that is employed in The Irishman also has this way of maybe subtly showing us the ephemeral nature of looking back in memory, and perhaps what we're looking when we think back. Maybe there is this way in which we are thinking back through our own perspective, and maybe our own perspective is, quote unquote, not as real as the actual reality was. Thus, the idea of when we see these past sequences in The Irishman, there is a sense that maybe the application of this de-aging effect creates the sense of the artifice, or the sense of the emphasis on memory and fantasy. And so what does that say, therefore, about the engagement with these concepts that could ultimately be fiction or illusion or artifice? And what does that say, therefore, about the truths of the overall human condition? In those ways, my friends, I think The Irishman and this film, Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, are beautiful companion pieces. And then just returning here for final comment before I move on, I should say, therefore, that the engagement with this work makes for such compelling watch. And every time I see it, I realize that there is more going on here than meets the eye. There is more construct, there is more illusion, there is more fiction, there is more the creation of an aura. But that also goes at the heart of, in a very interesting way, of what these artists are creating in terms of their art. And ultimately, it comes down to the music, right? The music is what makes this work alive. The music is what makes this whole world alive. And whatever we think about truth and artifice, we see the music. And indeed, the music is a perfect example of that. It is truth. It is really what's happening. We see it in the moment. But as I say, like with all live performances, it is there and then it's gone. It is singing about things that are true and real to our lives, but it is using metaphor and images and turns of phrase that could also be said to be lyrical and poetry, and yes, indeed, fiction. So even the music itself is, I think, a wonderful embodiment of this type of beautiful engagement between truth and illusion. It's not a contradiction. On the contrary, it is a beautiful engagement between these varying tones, if you will, that are present here. And it goes towards the nature of art, goes towards the nature of fiction, and all the while, it gives us great focus into the music and loves and passions and true artistry that is Bob Dylan during this period, the Rolling Thunder Revue. This is the work, Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. The Criterion Collection release, what we have here is the Blu-ray release, and this is a beautifully presented digipack release, and this is purported to be a new 4K digital transfer approved by Scorsese, and it is a very excellent presentation. And indeed, the restoration, also with regard to the footage that was relied upon, is a very key element, and it is also the focus of one of the supplements. And so I will get to that in a discussion of the supplements. Speaking of which, let us now go towards the supplements that are included with this, as I say, remarkable and truly brilliant release from the Criterion Collection. And before I start, I should say, just as a general proposition, the supplements here present, I would say, yet further support and bases for the approach and perspective that I suggest exists here, namely the great balance between truth and fiction. I think the supplements here, each of them in their own way, go towards this particular hypothesis. And thus, I think the supplements are great. Supplements are wonderful. They are rich and they are so informative. But these seem to be, in a very interesting way, almost engaging with the work itself. And so they almost become hand in hand, integral to an experience of this particular work, I would suggest, which makes them essential. So speaking of the supplements, therefore, what do we have? The first supplement we have is an interview, a one-on-one interview, described as being from 2019 with Martin Scorsese himself. It's approximately 17 minutes. And we have the various points of discussion that he gives so brilliantly, so filled with passion and energy like he always does. He talks about his love of the music. He's talking about Bob Dylan, working with Bob Dylan in the moment, in the now, in terms of the present day interviews, and also touching upon the idea of not remembering or refusing to remember, which might be another way to look at it, which goes into the idea of not just the brilliance of the music, but also the idea of memory and looking back, and perhaps not wanting to look back, or perhaps this is a way of showing the temperament of the great artist. Or it could be, as I say, a comment on the ephemeral nature of memory and the subjective nature thereupon. So we have that as part of this great interview with Scorsese. But that's not all in this interview. We also get these great moments about how, for example, there are these allusions to mask wearing and wearing the mask. And this is part of specific details that emerge in the Rolling Thunder Revue performances. But they also speak, I think, to this conceit, if you will, of truth and artifice, or reality and fiction. Namely, the idea of wearing a mask is I think, another way of expressing something that is not yours. Right? The mask is not one's real face. It is a covering of one's face. In other words, the mask is a fiction that is covering the reality, if you will, of one's true visage. However, the conceit that is expressed by Scorsese and Dylan is that when someone is wearing a mask, he is going to tell you the truth, quoting from Dylan. That's what he says. And this is, I think, going at the very heart of the nature of truth and fiction as being explored by this work. And it's right there in the words of Dylan as embodied by Scorsese's capturing of that particular moment. And speaking of which, there's a great comparison and reference point made to the Abbas Kiarostami work, Close Up. This comparison that is made in this particular interview is bold and inventive and absolutely genius. Absolutely genius. The Abbas Kiarostami work, Close Up, deals with many things, but it deals, I think, in large part with not just the concept of art and truth, but also fiction and also illusion, and even to the point of where the film is challenging us, the viewers, as to what indeed is truth and what indeed is fiction. And that comparison is, I think, further evidence or further support for the approach of looking at this film as a blending of truth and fiction in order to create the impression of something that will lead towards the epiphany vis-a-vis the human emotion and the human experience. And so that comparison with Close Up is so genius and essential. And that becomes yet another essential text when trying to consider a work like Rolling Thunder Revue or Bob Dylan's Story by Martin Scorsese. So with those reasons and others, this interview with Scorsese it's genius. So you have to check it out if you can. So this is the interview with Martin Scorsese. Then we have an interview with David Tedeschi, and this is described as being from 2020. And this is also really quite remarkable because David Tedeschi goes also into the concepts of the Bob Dylan performances and also the history of the moment and the now, and also the American experience. And this is a great insight by Tedeschi because we are reminded about how this film is also in many ways a reflection of the fabric of American history at that particular time. However, also in keeping with the notion of the impressionistic nature of the retelling of the tale, and also the way in which it is, again, using truth and fiction in a way that is blending and multi-layered. Even the use of history is, I would dare say, very consistent with this approach, because it is using history, but is using it in a way that can tend to fictionalize certain aspects of history, let me put it that way. And it's not telling things inaccurately, that's not what I'm saying, but it tends to look at history in the way that one might recall history. In other words, we have impressions of our memories of what history was, but those may or may not always coincide precisely to the date and time that some event took place. But it is the impression of what's going on, and the impression is still consistent with what actually happened. And so these questions and more, I think, are alluded to quite beautifully in the supplements, including this interview with David Tedeschi. So another great one, approximately 11 minutes. But that's not all, because we get another interview, this time with Larry Ratso-Sloman. This is also described as being from 2020, On the Road with Bob Dylan. And this is approximately 18 minutes. And this is also so brilliant in terms not just of its content. It's great on that level because, of course, we have Larry Ratso-Sloman and his participation, how he became involved with this particular era and with this particular period, and how his reporting and his eyewitness testimony, if you will, became also a way of trying to record or trying to capture this particular moment in time, and the details as to how he became involved. Rolling Stone, he refers to Hunter S. Thompson and the idea of the road to Rolling Thunder. And so therefore we are dealing with a participant, someone who is a witness to history, someone who is with these people as history is being unfurled or unfolded. What we also get are great insights and anecdotes into, as I say, the nature of artifice in fiction and the creation of myth. And what I am getting at is, for example, he goes into the genesis for his particular nickname, as it were, Ratso. How did he get this name? And he became known as Ratso. And he recalls the story. And in fact, when he's retelling this story, it's extraordinary, because it really reminds us about how he and others within the Rolling Thunder Revue circle were relying, including Bob Dylan himself, I might add, were relying to a certain degree on some kind of creation of an identity other than who they were, or the creation of what might be called the persona or the myth, or someone other than what you are. But that someone who is other than what you are becomes who you are, because that is the position that you inhabit. It's this idea of masks, it's this idea of performance. This is the essence of art. And hence, dare I say it, the layering between truth and fiction becomes ever more, I think, pronounced when we realize that even the layers that exist between, say, the person and the art, these layers also indicate a kind of truth in and of themselves. And I think this anecdote about the creation or the genesis of the name Ratso, I think, is a great anecdote and another representation of this idea of the layers. And even if we have something that is, quote unquote, not one's real name, it's a nickname, but still it shows us something of the truth of the moment. And I think that is, at essence, what's going on here. So this is another great reason why this is a great supplement. Again, Larry Ratso-Sloman. So this is approximately 18 minutes. That's not all, because then we have the next supplement, which is what's described as additional performances. And we have, by my count, 3 performances. One, which is Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You. And then the next is Romance in Durango. And then the last is Tangled Up in Blue. So we have the first being from December 4th, 1975, Montreal Forum. And then the second being from November 20th, 1975, Harvard Square. And the third being November 21st, 1975. This is Boston Music Hall. So this is the information that's given here. And to watch these performances, I mean, this is at the heart of what's so great about this, is the music and the performances and the skill and the electricity and the dynamism and the history that's being made at the moment. It's brilliant. I'm so glad these are included here. And then we have a supplement which is called Restoration Demonstration. And this is also focusing in on comments made by Scorsese about the use and reliance on this particular footage that was shot at the time of these performances, and how Scorsese and company, the filmmakers and company, tried to approach this particular footage, use this particular footage, and then ultimately integrate this particular footage into the contemporary work, which is called Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. This is so fascinating for a number of reasons. Of course, on a technical level, it is showing us the great care and skill that was needed to, in fact, restore this particular footage for purposes of integration into this Martin Scorsese work. So that alone is worth the price of admission for purposes of this supplement. But that's not all, I would suggest, because, again, going back to this conceit that I'm trying to suggest or argue for, namely the idea that this work is all about illusion, fantasy, and artifice, and also truth and reality. So reality and fiction, and how this is interwoven between those particular tones. This idea of restoration, I didn't realize it until I saw this supplement, but this idea of restoration too, I think in its own subtle yet very direct way, speaks to this idea of truth and fiction. How so? The way that Scorsese describes it is, he describes the footage, the footage that the condition that it was found in, and it was in a very rough condition. It wasn't unusable in terms of what Scorsese was suggesting. In fact, I think he had made the comment in this particular supplement about how it was considered whether to use the footage as is without the restoration process, and you'd have this arguably, you'd have this maybe rough-looking type of footage, but it would still be a connection with the truth and the reality, right? Because it's representing scratches and all. That represents a close connection with the truth at the time. So that was one approach. But ultimately, Scorsese and company decided to restore this footage. Now, the restoration process is beautiful. The restoration process is pristine. It is magnificent. It is genius. Don't get me wrong. But in the conversation, one realizes that the restoration process is another layer or another step beyond what otherwise might be described as being the truth of the particular moment, namely the footage as it was. In other words, as it's being restored, we're adding an extra layer of quote-unquote artifice to the picture and the proceedings. Still, that addition or application of quote-unquote artifice vis-a-vis the restoration process is another way, I think Scorsese is arguing or suggesting, that this footage or the use of this footage is trying to get at a kind of truth. Does that make sense? In other words, the application of another layer to this vis-a-vis the restoration process might be said to be separating us further from the actual reality of the rough footage. But at the same time, and another way of looking at it, is in fact giving us another window closer to what the reality of the particular moment was. Looking at that, I think my mind was blown because I never thought of restoration in that type of way. But thinking about Scorsese's comments and then looking at the footage before and after, as it were, I could see the difference visually. It was very obvious. Of course, the restored footage is beautiful to look at, and one understands why it is being relied upon in this way. And with this particular supplement, I think that point is made even clearer, especially in the context of, as I say, the blending between reality and illusion. This is so profound, and I'm so grateful for the inclusion of this particular comment, again, on the restoration. So this is approximately 2 minutes, but really wonderful. Once again, how they took this, what essentially was a work print quality, and took it and made it into this beautiful looking footage. But once again, the the illusion of that still is speaking towards a type of truth. Brilliant, brilliant. And then, to round out the supplements, we have the trailer for the work, which is approximately 2 minutes. Then we have the presentation itself in this physical format. This is the digipack, as I suggest, with this really engaging artwork, which is a sort of tapestry, if you will, of this type of thing. And it opens up like so with the continuation of this artwork motif carrying through. And I've also taken the liberty prior to this to take out the booklet. As you can see, this is a great booklet. It is thick, it is robust, it is filled with so many great pictures, it is continuing the motif and conceit of the artwork, and it has a number of great writings. So the first is American Multitudes by Dana Spiotta, and this is another great and essential writing because it goes, of course, into the details of the work, and it goes into the significance of the particular background. But what is also so stunning is, actually, let me take a step back. In my description of the supplements just now for the Criterion Collection release of this work, I did not mention any kind of supplement about, say, a scholar or an academic or expert sitting down and, for example, talking with us about the specific points where this documentary is true and the specific points where it is illusion or fiction, because I think it would have been very tempting to have a supplement that had a specific catalog, if you will, of all the moments that were fiction and all the moments that were nonfiction, to give us insight into what is and what is going on with this particular work. We don't have anything like that presented in that kind of linear fashion, as it were. However, we get these fragments and we get these notions and these suggestions from Scorsese, from Tedeschi, from others. And we also get it from the essay here. And that's what I love. Even the supplements themselves present this truth-fiction type of dynamic in this jigsaw puzzle-like fashion. It doesn't give us everything straightforward. It presents it in this almost illusory and impressionistic way, which is brilliant because it is mirroring exactly what the film is doing. Brilliant stuff, but it's all there. And even in this essay, there are descriptions about certain instances of people interacting and how this may or may not have been staged. There is reference, of course, to Ronaldo and Clara. This is a very important aspect. Please read the essay for more information about that. There are also ways in which the essay is trying to describe the film as being fictional or apocryphal, which is a great word to use, and also going into the historical context as well. So this is a brilliantly presented essay that's going towards the heart of what I'm trying to suggest, once again, truth and fiction. So, and it's giving this in this wonderfully complex, labyrinthine way that is still down to earth and so accessible and very, very wonderfully written and easy to read and comprehend, and as great essays are. So I recommend this very much. It is called American Multitudes. And then we have entries from the Rolling Thunder Logbook by Sam Shepard. And when we look at this, we realize that we are also getting a very exciting, dynamic depictions of the type of art and inspiration that I think is representative of Rolling Thunder Revue. So what we're getting with this particular writing that's included here as it's presented here, the entries, right? We're getting, in essence, another perspective on the impression of what this type of artistic endeavor was. I mean, it's like we're getting the lived-in feel of the art of the moment as it's being expressed through these particular writings. So I find this to be another almost living example of what this Rolling Thunder review was all about. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that type of approach or perspective or conceit continues with what's known as Rolling Thunder Stones by Allen Ginsberg. And we have here these poems, these wonderfully poetic representations or impressions from Allen Ginsberg, who is also a very key figure in this particular Rolling Thunder review. Again, it is a living, breathing art, another way to put it, in the form of this, or captured in this particular presentation from Criterion in the context of this booklet. Essential stuff. And that's not all, because we also get Shaman hisses, you slide back into the night, and Waldman. And this is also continuation of the idea of the use of the written word, language, to express or somehow capture the essence of the artistic drive and integrity and excitement and energy that is at the heart of the Rolling Thunder review. So this is all here to, again, living, breathing testimony that is of the moment, of the now, and it is forever captured here, again, as examples of what this great moment really was about. And then we have information about the master, and there's also information about the cast and credits. The cast and credits, that's another story in and of itself, and I don't want to spoil it, but it also goes into the notion of truth and fiction and the like. And we have these great photos, some black and white, some color, all so brilliant. And then captured in this wonderful sense, again, of history and of the voyage, the journey and traveling, and the idea of the United States and what that is all about. The impression of this, my friends, the impression. It is all captured in the film, in the supplements, and in the presentation that is provided to us by Criterion. This is my way of saying, and I'll try to conclude, my way of saying that this release is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing. I mean, the film itself is absolutely a work of genius. And then to have these supplements that, in their own wonderful way, further illuminate more about the film while also maintaining the sense of mystery and aura in the spirit of the film itself. This is what makes Criterion so great, in my opinion. This is the Criterion release, spine number 1062 of this work from Martin Scorsese, which is called Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate it. And as always, please continue to be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time, my dear friends. I very much appreciate it. Anyway, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.